everybody, I'm Kathryn from the Sewing Studio at Lady Lake and the Sewing Studio Fabric Superstore. Welcome aboard. Today's machine instructional video is going to cover two models of machine, the Brother BQ950 as well as the comparable model, the Babylock Lyric. Okay, let's get started. Now let's talk about all the included accessories with your machine. The first thing I'm going to talk about is you have a dust cover, which is awesome. It keeps the dust off your machine. You also have a little pouch that holds most of your accessories, and you can snap it open and closed to put away all your little keepsakes. Okay, so you have an L-shaped screwdriver, which allows you to use this end of it when you're taking your screws in and out of your needle plate, or this end of it, depending on which is more convenient and easier to use for your particular hands. You also have an awl, which is an eyelet punch and also a hole. So on the tip end of your eyelet punch, you've got a very sharp and opening in a hole, which allows you to cut a hole into your fabric. Once you've done that, there is opening at the top there, so you could run your cord through the opening and then pull that cord back through your fabric and your project. You also have another type of screwdriver, which is really good for installing your needles as well. You have a disc-shaped screwdriver, which is good for installing and removing your needles, as well as installing and removing the screws from your needle plate. You have a bonus pack of needles. There's 3 different types of there, and they're indicated in the manual as to which type does what. You have a pack of twin needles. You have a thread net, which allows you to put it on spools of thread that are metallic or fussy. It kind of helps keep things under control. Okay, you also have a walking foot and a quilt bar. So with your walking foot, to install the quilt bar, you'll simply install the quilt bar into the hole in the back of your walking foot. That will allow you to line up your stitches on the guideline part of your quilt bar, while the walking foot does all your stitching for you. You also have here a straight stitch needle plate and its companion straight stitch foot. So on your straight stitch needle plate, there is one tiny round opening where your needle will insert and remove itself. There's no left to right stitching with that. This is truly just straight stitching. Now by doing this, your needle and your fabric are fully supported in a nice contained area to get really nice stitches. And again, this is your straight stitch foot, which allows all that fabric to be held down nice and clean, nice and precise in a small contained area to get really precise stitches. You have a little cleaner and stylus that comes with your machine, and you have 4 different spool caps, your large, medium, and small, and your little mini spool cap. Depending on the size spool of thread you're using, you're going to pick your spool cap for that purpose. You have some bonus feet that also come with the machine. This is an adjustable piping and zipper foot. So there's a screw on the back of this foot, which you're going to tighten and loosen to allow you to adjust depending on the height and bulk of the piping and or zipper that you might be using. This is a stitch alignment foot, so if I've done a row of stitches, I can then move it out to a specific notch, and then that way I can get perfect rows of stitching. It's very, very helpful and very visual and very easy to see, so you can line up your stitches and have that stitch alignment foot help you do that. You have a 1/4 inch foot with a flange. The 1/4 inch foot with a flange lets you put your fabric right up against that, and it helps you keep that perfect 1/4 inch. You have a free motion quilting foot, which is very helpful when doing free motion quilting. You also have an open view, open toe foot. It's also called a candle wicking foot. And on the back of that, just like we had on our end foot, there's a groove worn through it, which allows your decorative stitches to slip through that. You also have a Teflon foot. The Teflon foot has a coating on the underside of it, which lets you put through leathers and vinyls and other types of fabric that might stick or grab on the base and bed of your machine. And last, you have an auxiliary spool stand for when you are using your twin needle. So the auxiliary spool stand installs like this. You're going to want to keep your secondary spool of thread headed the same direction as your primary spool of thread. On this end of it, you've got a round area that's going to install directly where your bobbin is. So you'll put that down and you're going to aim it in the same direction that your primary thread is, and you of course would have a matching spool cap to hold on whatever size spool of thread that you're using. When you actually go to thread your needle now, this spool of thread will be in your left needle on the twin needle, and this spool of thread will be on your right needle on your twin needle. If you want to keep your hands on your project, it's possible to use a knee lift to help raise and lower your presser foot. And in this machine, you have an included knee lift as an accessory. This end of the knee lift is going to install into that port on the very front of your machine. When you use your knee lift, and by pushing the knee lift out to the right side of your machine, it can raise and then also lower your presser foot. To install the foot pedal, you'll take the metal prong and install it into the foot pedal port right in the front corner of your machine. One of the wonderful included accessories is an extension table. An extension table is important because it helps provide extra sewing space and surface area, which allows it to lift up heavier, longer, bigger, bulkier projects like a quilt. So how do we install the extension table? Okay, you're going to start by removing your accessory bin. So you'll reach under and just simply pull off your accessory bin and set it to the side. With your extension table, there are actually legs on the back of the extension table. So you're going to want to open up every single one of the legs. And there are 4 of them. Once you've opened up the legs, you actually have little rubber feet on the bottom of each of these legs. These can be swiveled up and down to make adjustments for the height of wibbly surfaces or tables that may not be level. Okay, so once you have that where you'd like it, you're going to take your extension table, lay it nice and flat, and you're going to install it straight onto your machine, like that. So in order to remove the extension table, you're simply going to pull on the extension table to remove it from the machine. At this point, you can reinstall your accessory bin. So by reinstalling the accessory bin, just keep it on your nice flat surface and snap it into position. And again, in order to remove this, you're simply going to take a hold of it from underneath and pull out, and that's how you remove your accessory bin. Another wonderful accessory is the 2-thread spool stand. So you can install the 2-thread spool stand onto your machine, and you'd put 1 spindle on one side and 1 spindle on the other, and you can use this when you have metallic threads or larger spools, okay? Okay, let me show you how to thread the machine. First of all, the manufacturers recommend that when you thread the machine and put your spool of thread on the machine, that the thread comes off the bottom of the spool. It's also recommended that you match your spool cap to the size of spool that you're going to be using. Okay, so let's get started with that. The spool of thread is going to go on the machine with the thread coming off of the bottom of the spool, and then you're going to take your spool cap and put it right on to the spool, hugging it nice and tight against the back of the spindle. All right, so let's look over here at the fact that you've got lines and dotted lines all over right here. So there's actually 2 sets of lines. You have a solid line, which starts here and goes up around to the left where you're threading the machine. And you have a dotted line, which also starts here, comes up around and goes off to the right, as demonstrated there for winding the bobbin. So for threading the machine, we're going to start by coming around this hook right here. This hook is where it all begins. Notice that I am holding on to my thread here so that it's not all loosey-goosey. So I start by coming up around where it says number 1. Then I'm going to slide down and go underneath this hook here, which is the beginning part of the threading, and come straight up. Now, if I was threading the machine, I'm going to come off to the left. If I'm winding the bobbin, I'm going to come off to the right. So for threading the machine, here we are straight up, and we're going to travel around the back and straight down. Here we're going to U-turn at number 3 towards from the right to the left. As we head up this uptake area, we start on the right, swing all the way back, swing around to the left and come back down. So up on the right, down on the left. Then we're going to come straight down that uptake area, and right here is number 5 where it comes straight down. Now, right here above the needle, you've got the needle bar with a little tiny kind of piece of metal that sits on top of it. So the thread has to get popped into there like flossing your teeth. So however you manage to do it, you're basically taking your thread in and across that area. Okay, so there it is right there at number 6. We're going to head up towards number 7, which actually can clip into place. And then back here on the right side, there's actually a cutter blade here, which is going to cut the excess thread. That's number 8. Now number 9, right here, there's a lever on the side of the machine, and basically you just push it down and you've got a threaded machine. Okay, so let me show you how you wind the bobbin. Again, the spool of thread is on your spindle with a matching size spool cap, and the thread is coming off the bottom of the spool. So over here we have 2 sets of lines for the bobbin. We're going to be following the dotted line. So one is one for threading the machine and winding a bobbin. You come underneath this metal hook towards the left for the threading and the bobbin, straight up for the threading and the bobbin. Now here's where the difference happens. For the bobbin, we need to proceed over towards the right hand side. So usually what I do is I take my hot little finger here and I hold onto the thread so that I'm not all loosey-goosey and I've got some tension and something that I can manage. Now back here you've got a little tension disc that's going to help manage the thread as it travels over towards the bobbin. There is a long metal strip here and then this round metal disc. So the thread needs to come around the back of this like drawing the letter L, and from here between the metal strip and the disc, the thread travels straight down. So let's do that. From back here straight down to the front. At that point, you're holding on your tension on the thread so that you can swing it to the right under that disc. So between say 9, 8, 7, 6 o'clock, the thread has tucked in right underneath that disc right there, okay? All right, from here, we're gonna travel over towards the right where we're actually going to wind our thread on the bobbin. So let's talk about that bobbin for a second. Okay, so right here in your accessory bin, your bobbins are gonna be located on the left-hand side of your accessory tray. And let's for just 1 second pause. If you hold on to those bobbins, you'll notice that your feet are locked into that accessory tray so they don't spill everywhere when you get things out of there. And that makes it a little bit hard to pull out and push in, but that's just so that you don't have a hot mess. So here are your bobbins in the accessory bin. So let's take one of those bobbins out. We're going to open up our accessory tray and put our little feet tray back in there and close it up. All right, right here is where we're going to install the bobbin. There's a little metal wire right there on the side of the bobbin spindle. So it's important to snap the bobbin on so that that locks in. Well, how can you see it? You can't. So basically what you're going to do is just put your bobbin right straight down on that little winding pin. It doesn't have a right side up or a right side down. You just push it right down on there. Now that little wire needs to click into the groove. So spin the bobbin to the right and you'll hear a click as it locks into the little groove there on the bobbin. Okay, so now for putting the thread on the bobbin, we're going to take our thread and you've got a little bit of excess on your thread and you're going to wrap it from the back to the front 6 or 7 times in a clockwise motion. So if this is noon, that's where you're starting, and you're going to come around 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And again, now here I'm going to wrap it around 6 or 7 times. And once I've got that, on the side of the little holding plate for the bobbin, there's a little groove cut out and a razor blade in there. So what I need to do is I'm going to push my bobbin thread around into that groove right there, and I'm going to pull my thread to the right. Now it pinches and holds the thread under there, and it's also cut off my excess thread here, so I don't have to hold it through the little hole anymore. At this point, we need to engage the bobbin to the right so that it's held into place. Okay, so when I'm winding my bobbin, usually I wind at like a medium speed, not too slow, not too fast, just right. So I have my speed toggle set at medium. And if you use a foot pedal, you can just go ahead and step on the gas. If you don't have your foot pedal installed, you can use your start-stop button. Notice that when you're winding the bobbin, it's orange. If I disengage the bobbin, now it's red. So for bobbin winding, your little start-stop button here is going to be orange, okay? So I can go ahead and select start, and it starts to wind my bobbin. If I want to be done at this point, all I have to do is select that button again, and it stops winding. When the bobbin is full, it kind of starts to hiccup a little bit, doot, 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 and then you know that you have a full bobbin, plus at that point you'll be able to see it. So you would just again reach down and touch your stop button. But for right now, I'm going to go ahead and wind a bobbin. Okay, I'm happy with the amount of thread that I have, so I can go ahead and select my start-stop button at this point. Okay, so now how do we deal with this bobbin? Well, the easiest thing to do is just disengage the bobbin, so you'll push it towards the left. And you could reach for your scissors, or you could lift your bobbin straight up and use that same cutter that you used at the start to cut your thread, and now you've got your bobbin ready to go. Okay, so right here is where we're going to install our bobbin. So to start the process, there's a little rectangle button right here with an arrow pointing to the right. When you pull that little button towards the right, your bobbin cover springs up. At that point, you're going to go ahead and remove your bobbin cover. Now, to install the bobbin, you're going to go ahead and put the bobbin into your machine where it's turning counterclockwise against the clock. And you'll just go ahead and drop it right down into the area. Okay, if this is noon on the back of the bobbin area and 6 o'clock is down here on the front of the bobbin area, we need to understand that right at 7 o'clock is where your tension disc that's hidden under here is. So you need to put your finger on the bobbin to hold it nice and steady. And then with nice tension, you are swinging from 5, 6, 7 o'clock around to make sure that you've got your thread nice and tight in your bobbin tension area. So it's going to swing underneath that arm and then travel up over this, what my daughter calls the mountain. So I've traveled up and over and around. Now right here on this left hand side, there is a little razor blade hidden. So basically I'm going to pull my thread right across that razor blade towards the right, and it cuts my excess bobbin thread. Okay, at this point we need to put our bobbin cover back in place. As you're holding your bobbin cover, you're going to notice that on the left hand side there's a little tab. That little tab is going to get inserted right by the little metal tab here at the left side of your bobbin area. So basically you're going to just slide it down in there. Once you have it tucked in underneath that piece of metal right there, now all you have to do is snap down your bobbin cover and everything's in place. When you install your needle, you need to install your needle with the flat part of your needle facing the back of the machine. And actually, there's a wonderful safety feature that your machine has for you to keep you from hurting yourself. So right here, this button is called the needle exchange key. When I think about it, I think that needle's coming out, that needle's going in, as indicated by that little circle of arrows right there. When you select that key, the face of your machine is now going to show that icon on the screen. And what that does is lock everything up so that no matter what you touch, even over here on the neck of the machine, Nothing's doing nothing to keep it nice and safe while you put that needle in and out. And then when you're done installing your needle, you just have to select that button again in order to turn it off. Okay, so right there, that little dot is the stopping place for the needle when you insert the needle. You need to make sure you can see the needle touching that dot. So if I loosen the needle and start to take it out, you'll see space develops between that dot and where the needle is. In, out, in, out, in. So when you put the needle in, you may need to make sure it's inserted fully and completely and touching that dot stopping place. Let's talk for a second about this needle threader, which we love, 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 and how not to break it. Okay, so first of all, when you're dealing with your needle threader, there are several things you need to keep in mind to make sure that you can continue to use it and love it as much as you do. First of all, when you're using your needle threader, you want to use it on a standard 7511, 8012, 9014, and even a 116 needle are all okay. But if you go too big or too small with your needle threader, because the pin that inserts itself into the eye of the needle is so small, you can actually break the needle threader. So again, stay in the middle of the road, 7511 to 116 needles, and you're good to go. Second, you want to make sure when you install your needle that you've installed your needle all the way up into the machine in its full position, hitting that little stop button that we talked about. That's very important because again, with this tiny little eye of the needle, if you have it below where it's supposed to be, when that little wire goes to shoot into the eye, now it's going to hit the needle instead of the eye of the needle. Very bad, breaks your needle threader. The last thing that you want to consider is that you want to make sure your needle is in the highest position as you thread. So that's very important because again, if you've moved the needle down by taking your hand wheel and maybe turning it, and you've put the needle down, now you've taken that tiny little eye, moved it from its threading position, and again, as the needle goes to thread, as the threader happens, now that tiny little wire is hitting the needle, not the eye of the needle. So stay in the middle of the road with the size of needle that you use. Make sure your needle is inserted all the way and in its highest position so that we can keep a hold of that awesome threader which we love so much. Okay, so I want to have a little conversation about our feed dogs. Right here underneath where the presser foot would be sitting, you have feed dogs. Well, what are feed dogs? These little teeth, these little grippy teeth that are going to lift up, pull your fabric towards the back of the machine and drop down underneath, go back forward, lift up, pull your fabric back and drop down. Now, if I'm free motion quilting where I want to be the boss of my fabric, I need to drop those feed dogs. So how do I do that? Okay, well, first of all, you need to start by taking your accessory bin off because our little button is in the back of the machine. So you'll reach underneath and just go ahead and take your accessory bin off. And back here in the back of the machine, you have a button. You'll notice that there are triangles here. There are triangles below a line. That's the indication that the feed dogs are dropped, and triangles above the line, which means they're engaged and going to be actively going up and down and up and down and up and down. So if you're free motioning, you want to drop your feed dogs down by just flipping your toggle switch. I'd like to review the buttons here on the face of the machine. Let's start right here with our start stop button. When I do not have the foot pedal plugged in, this is where I can start sewing and stop sewing right here on the face of the machine. It is red right now because red means stop, which means I'm not ready to sew. So if I put my foot down, now that start stop button turns green, which indicates that I am ready to sew. And if you'll remember from earlier when you're winding your bobbin, that light now turns orange, which means it is winding the bobbin. Okay, so that's your start stop button. Just above your start stop button, you have your reverse button. So when you want to actually form stitches that come forward, go backward and come forward, actual reversing, this is the button that you're going to select. When you select it, as you're holding it down, it will continue to reverse. If you simply tap it one time, it will form one reverse stitch. This button right here is our locking key or reinforcement key, and it also is a stitch completion key. So if I want to lock at the beginning or the end of a stitch, this is where I'm going to make my selection. Not my reversing stitch, but my locking stitch. Also, if I'm in my decorative area and I want to complete a given stitch, I will select this button, and that little light that's right there is actually going to turn green. And I'll show you that in just a moment. This is where we have our needle up, needle down key. So wherever the needle is living at this moment, when I touch that button, it goes into the other place. So if the needle is up and I select this, the needle will go down. If the needle is down and I select this, it will come back up. And this is our awesome cut button. When we're at the end of a stitch, if we want to use our cutting from underneath the machine, we simply select this button and it will cut our thread for us. Remember, always cut on fabric, not on air. Let's talk about using this reinforcement key as a stitch completion key. So if I've selected a decorative stitch and I'm coming along to the end and I want to complete that stitch, as opposed to just stopping wherever it is as I get to a specific point, I'm going to select this button. When I do, that light is going to turn green and the machine will finish off or complete that stitch for me. So let's see how that works. Go ahead and start stitching. All right, so just started into the second stitch. If I'm ready to go and I just want to complete that one, I'm going to reach up and select my stitch completion key. That light turns green, and now at this point, the machine is going to finish that number 2 decorative stitch and finish it up and then just stop. And there it is. So as you can see, the machine actually finished off or completed that particular stitch. Okay, so when you don't have the foot pedal plugged in, this is your speed. And it's not just 3 notches of speed, slow, medium, and fast. It's actually a sliding scale. So with no foot pedal, when I have this over to the far left-hand side, the machine is going very, very slowly. As I move it to the middle, it gets faster, and then even faster yet. So let's look at those speeds. When I start sewing, slow is very slow. And then as I'm sewing, I can increase my speed and then I can quickly hit stop. So this speed control icon button right here actually also helps you when you are sewing with the foot pedal. When the foot pedal is plugged in, this is kind of like the jockey holding the reins on the speed of your out of control foot. So for me personally, I like to have my foot pedal plugged in and I like to put my speed on medium. So what happens at that point is when I step on the gas, I hit that medium wall of speed and it just sews right along at that speed and doesn't go any faster. And the reason I like that is that sometimes when I step on my foot pedal, all of a sudden my fabric jerks away from me because all of a sudden it flew away. So this kind of helps keep your foot under control. Okay, so the third function of this is width control. All right, so when I go to my main operational menu and select it, on the second page of 8 pages of options is my width control. If I turn my width control on, now watch what happens to the needle as I toggle from slow, the needle's in the left position, over to the right. So the needle is moving from left to right in conjunction with me sliding my speed control fast, which is to the right, or slow, which is to the left. One of the cool things about width control is that I have a customer who's an art quilter. So she wants to do a bird and she wants to sew his perfect little beak. So she does that with width control. And let's see how that happens. Okay, I've selected a zigzag stitch here, stitch number 5, and I've put it at a super short length so that I have a satin stitch. And I have started by having a nice wide beak at the face connection point of his beak. And then as we move out to the tip of his beak, where we have it nice and skinny, we're going to slide our toggle from fast to slow, and we're going to create that perfect beak. Now let's start sewing. I've placed the fabric where the head of the bird and the beak connection point is right here in the opening of my presser foot. So I'm going to start sewing with the speed over on fast, which is nice and wide. And as I start sewing, I'm going to work my way down slowly to the slow to create that pointed beak. So there we have our perfect little beak. Let's move on to all the icons and functions that are here on the face of your machine. Okay, let's start by talking about the fact that this button right here is an automatic reverse button, which means when you start sewing, the machine will perform either the locking or the reversing, depending on the stitch that you've chosen. So by selecting that icon, the blue light at the top of it appears, letting you know that you have it engaged. So right now I have selected stitch number 1 off of the keypad way of stitch selection. Stitch number 1 has a reverse and it's a left needle position. So now I'm going to go ahead and select this automatic reverse function, which engages the blue light, letting me know that I've got this as a selection. Okay, so once I do that and I start to sew, the machine has come forward, it's automatically reversing for me, and it's going to continue to sew. Once I get to the end of the stitch, all I have to do is tap my reverse button. It automatically performs the reversing for me and stops with the needle in the down position. Okay, so let me go ahead and deselect that automatic reverse function. Now, if I select my cutting function here, it actually highlights and turns on both functions, the automatic reversing and the cutting at the end of the reversing. So let's see it in action with both of those features selected. When I start sewing, it comes forward, reverses for me, and then continues to sew. Again, the machine doesn't know where the end of my piece is, so I have to tap my reverse button. It automatically reverses, comes forward, and cuts for me. So as you can see at the start of both of these stitches, I had selected the automatic reverse stitches, stitch number 1, left needle with a reverse. What does it look like if I have my automatic reversing and cutting with the locking stitch? It's going to appear very differently. So let's see what that looks like. I'm going to go ahead and put my foot down and start sewing. Lock, lock, lock in place. The machine goes along, and at the end I tap my locking key, lock, lock, lock in place, and it also cuts. So as we look at it now, you've got a tiny little knot at the end and at the start, as opposed to a buildup of stitches. Okay, so let's talk about what we actually see on the lit up portion of our screen. So first of all, I can see that I'm in my keypad way of selection right there. That's this keypad right here, indicated that it's selected with the blue light at the top of the button. And I'm in stitch number 1, which is the stitch that I have selected. So that's telling me I'm in this way of selection, and that's the stitch that I've chosen. Over here on the right side, I can also see that I have my needle customized to stop in the down position at the end of whatever I'm doing, which is actually quite nice. And also I have the stitch continuous, which means that it's going to sew one stitch after another, after another, after another, until I finally stop sewing or hit my reverse button. Over here on the left-hand side of the screen, it indicates that for this particular stitch that I've chosen, I should be using my J foot. And I can see that my needle is in the left needle position. My stitches are forming on the left-hand side of my presser foot. When I select the center needle, so stitch number 3, now you can see the stitches have jumped from the left to the center. You can see that right on the screen. Okay, let's talk about these functions down here and how we can manage those. The black background is indicating that these three settings are in the default way of working. So the machine has built-in intelligence letting you know that it thinks this is what you should be doing. The first indication here is kind of a W on its side. That is your width option. So if you want to change the width of the stitch, this is where you're going to do it. If you want to change the length of your stitch, that's here in the center by the dot, the medium, and then the long dash. And over here, this is tension. Not something I generally touch at all, but if you need to, you can. It's right here. Okay, so let's choose a stitch with a zigzag. And here with the width, I can decrease my width. The screen does not show that, but I can see that here I have no black background around my setting, which indicates I'm in control of this width. I have changed my width. Now, how can I quickly restore to my default because I realize this is not a setting that I want? Well, over here on the right-hand side, the second icon down, you've got these diagonal lines in kind of a diamond box. When I select that, it's a stitch restore key, which takes me right back to my default setting. So depending on the kind of sewing you're doing, you might want to make changes and save those changes in as a way of working. For instance, I typically sew garments, so I'm going to be using my left needle position with a reverse, stitch number 1. I also make garments that tend to be costumes for my child, so I can increase the length of my stitch to 3 because I make a lot of mistakes. And it's easier for me to see to rip out a length of 3. And so right here, there's an arrow going into the diamond, and this is a setting that lets me save my setting of the way I do the stitch 99% of the time into memory. Now, every time I go to select my stitch, it's going to be in that setting. So I'm going to come away to a center needle position and come back to touching that stitch that I use most of my life. When I select that, you can see it held on to my particular saved setting. So if you do something all the time a certain way, like paper piecing or quilting, and you want to save your own customized setting, all you have to do is select this icon and you can put your setting right into memory. Now let's say that I want to briefly go away from this and just do the default for just this 1 second. Again, all I have to do is select that stitch restore key. It brings me back to my setting. I can sew it at the normal default, but the next time I go back to selecting my stitch, it is brought up in my way, my setting. Okay, let's talk about some of these icons over here on the far right-hand side of our machine. This icon right here is a button that lets us start fresh at the corner of whatever we're doing. So I've selected this decorative stitch here on the screen. I'm in my decorative stitch tab number 1 on stitch number 15. If I come to the corner and I need to turn my corner, I want to start fresh at the very top of that stitch as opposed to half and way through my corner. So let me show you what happens when I select that icon. So as I approach my corner and I need to stop and turn, I'm going to select stop. It stops right in the middle of wherever that stitch is in the middle of forming. So I'm going to lift my presser foot and turn my fabric and put my foot back down. Now at that point, I'm simply going to start and select this stitch refresh key, which brings it back to the beginning of that particular stitch pattern, and it'll start fresh here at the corner turn. So when I press start now and I start sewing now, it's starting at that tiny little circle right at the top of that decorative stitch. So here at the corner, you can see it started at the top of that decorative stitch instead of finishing the other half of that stitch. So that's a nice fresh way to start at the corner of your piece. This button right here is a return button and a clear button. So right now on the screen I have decorative stitch number 15. If I don't want to do that anymore, I can select this button and it clears my screen. This button is your operational menu for how the machine is working. When you make a change in here to how the machine is working, you're telling the machine, this is how I want you to work. And it's going to hold on to those settings and changes that you make in this area after you turn the machine off and turn it back on, because it's working the way that you told it to. So this is a really good way of customizing your machine for your type of projects that you're doing. However, if you're done doing a specific project and now you need to go back to your default, go ahead and do that right at the end of your project so that you don't have some weird setting on there that doesn't apply to this new project. So let me select the operational menu and let's go into how this operates. So when I select the operational menu, it opens up or wakes up on page 1 of 8 pages of options. There are 3 options on this first page of menu options. Let's talk about these 3 options down here below the screen. So if I want to move to page 2, this first far left set of negative and positive will take me, if I touch the plus, to page 2 or the minus back over to page 1. So these 2 buttons will go forward a page or backward a page. Now, how do I get from the top option to the second option? This middle set of negative and positive goes up a line or down a line. So if I want to get to needle position, I'm going to select my down button, and it went down, negative, see the arrow is pointing down, to the second option on the page. Now, if I want to make a change in that selection, this third set of arrows, negative and positive, is where I make that change. So right now, the machine is customized to stop with the needle in the down position. If I want the machine to stop in the up position, I would simply select this button, and now I've made that change. So again, this changes the page that we are on. This changes the option on the page, and this changes the selection of that option. Okay, so let's start with what these different things do here. Okay, so here on page 1 of our menu, the very first option and selection we can make is to check our ABCs. In other words, if I've typed out, Kathryn is amazing, and I want to be able to see all of that writing to make sure I didn't spell my name wrong, this is where I would go and check my ABCs. The second option here is your needle position. Do you want to stop in the down position or the up position? So again, most of the time, we want our needle to stop in the down position when we're completed sewing. Your third option here is the twin needle option. Right now it's off because I don't have my twin needle in. If I put in a twin needle because I want to do something decorative, I would need to select my twin needle mode into the on selection. And what that will do is help prevent me from choosing stitches that I cannot perform with a twin needle. Okay, so let's go to page 2. So we have 2 options on page 2. The first option is width control. So when you want your width control turned on, again, you'd make that selection here on the far right. Most of the time, your width control will be in the off setting. The other selection on this page is the needle position initially. So when you turn the machine on and it wakes up, do you want the needle to be in the left needle position? Or do you want it to be in the center? If you're a quilter, you might prefer to have the machine wake up in the center needle position. Okay, let's go to page 3. So here on page 3, you have 3 options here that you can make selections on. The first one is elongation. So let's see what that looks like. So first of all, I'm going to go into my decorative stitches, and I'm going to return out of the menu screen so that I can see the stitch that I want to choose. I like to show elongation with this stitch here, number 13. So with my decorative stitch number 2, I'm going to choose 13. This is a wonderful little satin stitch scallop. Okay, over here on the far right hand side, we have a single pattern versus a continuous pattern. So for this purpose, I'm going to select one single scallop, because when I go to my menu, I can go down to page 3, take my elongation from a setting of 1 to 5. So let's start with a setting of 1, and I'm going to return out of my menu, and I'm going to select number 13 again and go to my menu to page 3, change it from an elongation of 1 to 2. Let's return out of here, select stitch number 13 again, go to our menu and change to page 3, elongation of 3. Let's return out of here, select number 13, go to our menu, page 3, elongation of 4. Let's return out of here, select stitch number 13, go to our main menu, and select an elongation of 5. Let's return out of here, and let's see what that looks like. So it's going to stitch the first little scallop with an elongation of 1, and then it proceeds to the second scallop with an elongation of 2, and then it's going to continue with elongation of 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so here's what this particular stitch looks like with an elongation of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So I have a customer that does dolly dresses and me dresses for the little girl. So for scale purposes, on Dolly, she wants a nice small little dress stitch on a small little doll. But over here on the girl, she wants a longer stitch, so the scale of it is much larger and much longer. So that's where elongation can become very valuable. Okay, so right here on the screen, I've selected that same little scallop with an elongation of 1, and the scallop again, this time with an elongation of 5. Now up here in the right hand corner, I have one single heart. That's because I've chosen the stitch once at an elongation of 1 and once at an elongation of 5. Now here on the far right hand side in the corner, I've got my one heart / many hearts. If I select that icon, now it's going to stitch this particular pattern continuously. In other words, a length of 1, a length of 5, an elongation of 1, an elongation of 5. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, so here on the second one, you can see I've got an elongation of 1 and an elongation of 5. And because I went back over to a continuous pattern, now I have 1 and 5 and 1 and 5 continuously. So 1 elongation of 1, 1 elongation of 5, and then I selected my single versus continuous button to make that particular pattern continuous. So here on the second option of page 3 of the menu is thread density. Over here on the right hand side, you can see it's kind of a very loose zigzag satin stitch. I can also toggle to make it a tight satin stitch. So right here I've got the loose and then I've got the tight. Let's see what that looks like. So as you can see, the first time I stitched this out, I had it on a less dense way of stitching. And on the second time I stitched it out, I had it on a very dense way of stitching. And it really does make a big difference. Why is that important? If I had a thinner fabric like a batiste, perhaps I wouldn't want the buildup of all the stitches. But if I had a thicker fabric like jeans, I might want a nice big dense satin stitch. The third option on page 3 is character spacing. And here, if I've typed out Kathryn is awesome, I can space my K away from my A, away from my T, farther apart and closer together here on this particular selection. So the first option on page 4 is size selection. Over here on the right-hand side, you've got a square that's large, and I can toggle to the small option. So this would be good if you were doing something like lettering. The next two options on page 4 are fine adjustment vertical and fine adjustment horizontal. So with your fine adjustments vertical and horizontal, you can make adjustments to how your feed dogs are working. If a stitch isn't forming properly, instead of running straight in to see your technicians either here at the Sewing Studio Fabric Superstore or up in Lady Lake, you can make some changes on your own at home. So this makes little adjustments to how your feed dogs are working. So if a stitch doesn't come around and connect at the end of it, then this way you can make an adjustment here. Gotta tell you though, I never touch this section. On page 5 of your menu, you only have one option where you can make adjustments. It's your presser foot pressure. So if I have some thicker fabric I'm trying to move underneath my presser foot, I might want to have less pressure. If I had some sort of thin silk or chiffon, I might want to have more pressure. Page 6 of your operational menu has some basic operational things. First of all, the first option is your buzzer. I like to leave it on because if I have a problem, I want to hear the machine beeping at me to indicate that there is a problem. Here on the second option, you have your light. In other words, your bed light. So you can have your light on or you could turn your light off. Why on earth would you ever turn your bed light off? Well, if you're doing tone on tone sewing, say cream on cream, it's really, really hard to see those stitches forming where they are forming. But if you turn your bed light off and get a little side lamp aimed across your project, now you can see the texture of what you're sewing and where you're sewing. And that's made possible by turning that bed light off. The final option on page 6 is the brightness of your screen. So you can increase and decrease the brightness of your screen at your own specifications. Let's move to page 7. Okay, so there are 3 options here on page 7. Let's start with option number 1, reinforcement priority. Okay, so with reinforcement priority, I am not a quilter. I'm learning how to quilt. So what this particular function does is it makes the locking or the reinforcing at the beginning of a stitch the priority. So in other words, as I'm sewing, my finger is always used to pressing my reverse button. However, when I'm quilting, I want to touch my reinforcement button or my locking key. But the thing is, habitually, I reach for my reverse because it wasn't until recently that I had an awesome machine with a reinforced key. So by selecting reinforcement priority and turning that on, what it will do is it will compensate for my reaching and touching my reverse button. And instead of reversing, it will actually reinforce for me. So let me show you how that happens. Here on my main menu, my operational menu, on page 7, I've taken my reinforcement priority and I've turned it on. Now I'm going to return out of my main menu options. Okay, so if I'm piecing the pieces of my quilt together, I'm probably going to select option number 4 here, which is a center needle position with a reinforcement. I've selected my reversing reinforcing for me. I have my reinforcement priority on, and I'm going to start sewing. When I start sewing, it reinforces at the beginning for me. At the end, I touched my reverse button, but it actually reinforced or locked it for me instead of reversing because I made that reinforcement a priority. So here at the end of the stitch, there I've got my beautiful little locking stitch, my reinforcement stitch, instead of a reverse. Thank goodness the machine can protect me from myself. So honestly, for me, by leaving my machine with reinforcement priority selected on, it's just gonna do reinforcing when I've chosen a stitch that is supposed to be reinforced. So in my opinion, there's no reason to have that off. Go ahead and turn it on and just keep yourself safe. The second option here on page 7 is input sensitivity. If you feel like when you're touching your buttons it's too responsive or not responsive enough, you can change that input sensitivity. Your third option here is your language, so select whatever language you'd like to work in. The last page of your menu is the version of your machine. Periodically, the companies will come out with updates on firmware for the functions that are within your machine, within the wiring and programming of your machine. So right here on this last page of your menu, the version that your machine is in is indicated right there with a specific number. Okay, so when you go to turn your machine in for service, which is something you should probably do annually, it's recommended that you should. Usually that's a good time to ask your technician, would you mind updating my machine if the version needs to be updated? And then they can take care of that for you. So I've selected a blanket stitch here. One of the wonderful options on the machine is the fact that you can mirror image your stitch. So in other words, right now we have the tine of our blanket stitch there and the individual spokes are hanging down from it. But if I select my mirror imaging option, boop, it flips it. So right there it's indicated that I'm in the mirrored option and the tine is on the one end and the spokes are now hanging up the other direction. So let's see that again. Depending on which direction I want to feed my applique, I can mirror image my stitch to accomplish that. This icon right here, this button, is where we can save a stitch that we have created into the memory of the machine. So I went to my decorative stitches and I selected decorative stitch number 12 and I made it just one of them. And then I returned and I added decorative stitch number 20. So now I've got one little candle wicking and one little X. If I've done the work to create this beautiful stitch that I've customized with my machine, I don't want to have to redo it for every time I pull this out. So I can save this down into the memory of my machine. Right here, it opens up into one of 5 pages and memory pocket number 1. So I'm going to select OK, and that's going to save that stitch to memory. Okay, so when I want to get out of there and it's time for me, tomorrow's a new day, and I want to get that particular stitch out of my memory pocket, over here there's an icon that is split in half. I've indicated and talked about the keyboard selection already, but if I select it again, now I've opened up into my memory pocket. If I've got my stitch that I want highlighted, this is where I can now pull it up out of memory by selecting OK, and there it is ready for me to stitch out. Let's see how that looks. So now this stitch that I've took all my time and energy to create, I can just pull out of my memory and do it again on future projects. This is our J-foot as indicated by the letter behind the snap-on bar. So the J-foot is our standard utility zigzag presser foot. This foot is really good because you've got a clear view here and you've got 3 notches to indicate left needle, center needle, and right needle positions. This is our end foot, or our decorative stitch foot, and sometimes it's referred to as the monogramming foot. On this particular foot, there is no metal across the center of the presser foot. It allows you a nice clear view into what you are stitching. Now, the big difference between the end foot and the J foot happens on the back of the feet. Let's look at that. So here we have side by side our J foot, our utility zigzag foot, and our decorative stitch foot. So the differences between the feet are actually quite obvious. Even though the opening where the needle will do its stitches is exactly the same size opening, the J foot is longer, helping the fabric to grab faster under the feed dogs. But the end foot is wider. This allows the fabric to have more of it held into position while the decorative stitches are forming. The real difference, though, is on the back of the feet. When I turn the feet upside down, you can see the end foot actually has a channel that goes from the front to the back, which allows the buildup of denser, satinish type of stitches to slide through without getting stopped by being pushed on at the foot and feed dog area as it would have done on the J foot. So if you've ever been sewing along with a nice beautiful decorative stitch and it just your fabric stops moving and it just kind of jams up and won't progress for you, it's probably because you had on the wrong foot. With the J foot, it's going to stop that motion on the denser stitches. So by putting the end foot on, it will allow those dense satin stitches to progress right through underneath the foot without getting stopped and swooshed. This is the G foot. The G foot is there for overcasting. Overcasting is a stitch that will seal the edges if you've got fabrics that fray. If you look at the G foot, along the length of the foot, there's kind of a right side and a left side to this foot. Along the right side of the foot, there's a flange that comes around that will balance your fabric or brace your fabric. Let me turn that foot over for a second and let's look at the back of it. There's actually a tiny little piece of metal on that flange that hangs down beneath the foot where you can brace your fabric right up against the edge of that flange. So let's see what that looks like. When I place my fabric underneath the G foot, the overcasting foot, that fabric can actually push against that little flange that hangs beneath the foot. So when you're putting your fabric there, you're going to butt right up against that little flange and place your foot down. So here with this overcasting stitch, the thread forms over the edge of your fabric, and that way it helps contain or encase the edge of your fabric so that the fraying will not happen. So this is our R foot for blind hemming. You'll notice on this foot, there is a very large metal flange, which we're going to brace our fold of our fabric up against in order to create that blind hem. Let's look at how that works. With a blind hem stitch, the bulk of the stitches forms on the right side of this fold. So you're going along and it stitches along here, leaps over and takes just a teeny tiny little nip of the folded fabric, comes back over to this side, sews along, leaps over and takes a nip, comes back over and sews along. So the important thing is to put that fold of your fabric right up against that metal flange and to sew slow enough so that when you're watching it here, that you watch the needle take a nip of the fold. Also, you're going to be making that letter Z in order to create that blind hem there. So it comes over and forms the letter Z. So that's how we're going to do the blind hem. Let's see what it looks like. Leap, watch it, nip, back over, nip, So you want to just grab 1 or 2 threads. You don't want to have railroad ties on the other side of your fabric, and obviously you would match your thread color. So this is the inside of your fabric, where the outside is my little nips. So to create that blind hem, you're folding up the bottom of your fabric, the hem of your fabric, because you wouldn't want to have raw edges showing. Then your fabric gets folded on top of that so that the fold and the edge of the fabric has about 1/4 inch. That creates the letter Z, and that's how we do a blind hem. The I foot is your zipper foot, and depending on whether you're feeding in the left side of your zipper tape or the right side of your zipper tape, you're going to snap your foot on either side accordingly. This is the A foot or the buttonhole foot. Your machine will form a perfect size hole because you can slide open the end of the buttonhole foot, place your button in the end, and pinch it down. Right here between these 2 flanges, there's a buttonhole lever which will pull down, and it will sew the perfect size hole for the button because the diameter is measured here at the end of the A foot. Let's see how that works. To install the A foot, this portion of the foot is quite high, so if you lift up, it'll give it some extra height in order to clap down on that bar. Then you need to pull down your buttonhole lever. So that lever needs to go down in between the 2 arms of the foot so that it'll trigger as it hits the back and hits the front to tell the machine, I need to sew back, wait, I need to go to the front, wait, now I need to go to the back. So you get that perfect buttonhole. So you'll mark the placement of your buttonholes on your fabric. When you go to slide the fabric now under the presser foot, you'll see that mark inside the opening on your presser foot. When you put your foot down, I like to have the fold of my fabric along the right side of my foot, and I like to be able to see inside that opening my line of where I've indicated my buttonhole needs to start. I also like to have that line just in front of the red marks on the inside of my foot. Also, to know where the center of your buttonhole is, where you're going to be slitting open your buttonhole, there's a center red mark on your presser foot as well. When removing your buttonhole foot, you're going to drop your foot down just like you've done all of the other presser feet. However, at this point, you need to remember that the buttonhole lever needs to be slid back up inside the machine, all the way at the highest position. This is the M foot. This is the foot you use to install a button. So with this particular foot, there is a clear plastic lever here, which actually creates a shank space. When that lever is pushed down, there is a clear plastic flange right in the opening of the foot, which allows the thread to form over that flange, giving you a little bit of distance so your button isn't sewn directly to your fabric. It'll give you a little bit of area and space to create a shank. So when you use this foot, you need to start by installing the button into the foot. So with this particular foot, there's a little bit of a spatula there, and the button is going to go between the white plastic and the spatula. You'll be placing the holes of the button next to the red indication marks on your presser foot, and it is held in place between this metal spatula and the white plastic part of the top of the foot. When installing your M foot, just as with the A foot, you're going to need to lift in order to install over the height of the presser foot and bring your presser foot down to clamp right into position. Be sure and mark your fabric as to where your button will be installed. When you go to select the button fixing stitch, you need to make sure, because not all buttons are created equal, that your needle is going to insert itself in either side of the hole of each hole on your button. So you're going to slowly turn your hand wheel down to make sure that your needle has full clearance on one side. Keep turning towards you, and then check the other side. Now, right now, my needle has hit the button because I don't have the button in the right position. So at that point, you just need to gently noodle your button into a slightly different position so that the needle will have its clearance. I like to check it twice. I'm clear on the right, I'm clear on the left, and also see right there that the stitches are forming over that shank flange to give your button a little extra space. I like to stitch this nice and slow and let the machine form its stitches. Sometimes, just because I have a theater background, I like to do that twice just to make sure that button will not go anywhere. When you remove your button out of this foot, you're going to need to lift your presser foot and pull the button straight towards you. And as you can see, there's a little bit of space formed underneath that button, so it's not formed so tight up against your fabric. And there you've installed your button. I'd like to show you how to install the walking foot. You're going to start by removing whatever foot you have on the machine. Once you've dropped that off, now you need to remove the presser foot holder or ankle. So if you have your disc-shaped screwdriver, you're going to start by righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, loosening the bolt on your presser foot holder so that it falls off. Once your presser foot holder is removed, your walking foot is going to slide right around that bolt, but you have to do two things at once. You're also going to need to install the claw of your walking foot up over your needle bar. So the claws around the needle bar, I'm going to loosen this bolt just a little bit. Once you've got the claw around the needle bar, you're going to bring that walking foot forward right through the bolt, and then you're going to tighten the bolt to hold the walking foot directly to the shaft of the machine. Your walking foot is going to help you manage multiple layers of fabric. Okay, that wraps up today's video. I hope that you enjoyed and you learned a lot. Okay, so the Brother BQ950 and the Baby Lock comparable model, the Lyric, are available here at the Sewing Studio Fabric Superstore or at the Sewing Studio at Lady Lake. If you have any questions, please stop by one of our locations and ask us. We're happy to help. You can also leave a comment below and we'll get back to you as soon as we possibly can. Now, I hope that you enjoyed everything, you learned everything, and now it's time for you to take off and sew. All right, bye everybody.